Hello, friends. Welcome to the Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is execution, visibility, and financial control, how Infios solves global supply chain challenges with my friend Alan Rowlett. How's it going, Alan?
Not too bad. How are you doing? Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too. So, Alan, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
You got it. As you mentioned, my name is Alan Rowlett. I am a corporate vice president for Infios, and I'm currently leading the freight audit and payment division located out in the Chicago market. I do work from home, as you can tell, but that's where I'm currently residing. Infios, the organization that I'm representing, they're a forward-leaning organization that is really focusing on the end-to-end supply chain execution. We're talking about warehouse, fulfillment, transportation, order management, kind of everything in between there. We service really those complex multimodal enterprises, manufacturers, retailers, distributors, things like that. We even have partnerships with logistics providers, which has been pretty cool. And really, the core thing that we do is what I alluded to, which is that execution at scale. And that I've talked about it a little bit. As things get more complicated, more need for connection, more need for technology. That's where we're playing in that space.
Yep. So the name Infios, Infios.
That is correct.
Sometime before, I've never known, I've talked to you guys many times, and I've never known whether to say Infios or Infios, and it's Infios. So
that is correct.
That's a relatively new name. Talk about it's a new entity. Talk about what's under that umbrella, because I think everyone's going to recognize the names under that umbrella. I should say, you think you got rid of those old names.
Yeah. So Infios was a rebrand, as you mentioned, of a kind of collection of organizations that have been acquired over time. The most notable would be MercuryGate as our TM solution. The reason that we did that rebrand is because a lot of the solutions that are in our portfolio, like the order management, the warehouse management, and as I mentioned, the TM, those were all either strategic acquisitions or builds that were going after a specific cause. But Infios wanted to be what I mentioned, that end-to-end supply chain provider. So they started bringing in all of these organizations together under one flag, and then actually started complementing it with adjacent or kind of tangential services like freight audit and pay and things like that for our TM solution. So they wanted to have that end-to-end. They wanted to put it under a new flag. But yeah, a lot of the things like MercuryGate are well known in the industry.
Yeah. And you mentioned some of the names underneath it, like MercuryGate, Körber Supply Chain. One of the things people say on my podcast, and they say, "Oh, Joe, we have end-to-end visibility." And I was like, "Oh, that's excellent. From where to where?" And they say, from the time we pick it up at your factory to the time we deliver it to a warehouse or a retailer. And I was like, "What's that?" That's 2 days. That's a handshake, not a hug. End-to-end for a supply chain could be 16 weeks.
Absolutely.
That order might have originated 16 weeks ago with an order that went to Mexico or China or North Carolina, and it doesn't end until we get paid. I'm from automotive. I did a lot of lean work, and we always say order to cash. That's the business, order to cash. And what happened over time is supply chain just developed a whole bunch of fantastic solutions. I call them silver bullets. The first time I saw a transportation management system, I was like, "Oh, this is so awesome." And I remember presenting it to a potential customer. They looked at me like I was Steve Jobs. And I thought I might be. They were so impressed. But now we know transportation management, whether it's over the ocean or across the country, it's only one part. There's also the warehouse part. There's also the freight audit and pay. We're going to talk about that in a minute.
The order management.
Right. Order management, of course. And what we really need is interconnected transportation, interconnected systems. I don't want a whole bunch of silos.
You're saying it so much better than I could. You nailed it. That's where, thank you for telling everyone who Infios was. That's where we exist, right? Order management, all the way up to payment and resolution or settlement. And I'm happy to hear you talk about those value streams like order to cash, procure to pay. Like that is my philosophy as well. That's how I lead the team. That's how I'm driving the organization. And I'm with you on that. If it can't be controlled in that entire flow, then you have gaps and handoffs that we need to address. And that's what we're trying to solve.
And those handoffs are sometimes why we have our data Some of it's in my email. Some of it I got text messages on, and some of it is in my transportation management system. And then I've got some of it over in a warehouse management system that I don't really get access to. Somebody says, that's fine. You just every morning log into your 16 systems and you're and then put it all into
all of your passwords.
Yep. And then you just copy, paste into a spreadsheet and you're back in 1995.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. I think we're going to get in more detail into this in a minute, but I think to have the speed that we want, to have streamlined systems, to get away from the freight fraud, the cybersecurity, all that stuff, we need to tighten up our systems and really need to be able to just talk about order to cash, not, yes, I have $1 million solution for my order management, but I don't have anything connecting me to the rest of the stuff. I don't think that works for
creates bottlenecks and flow issues.
Yeah. And by the way, that's where we run into more, not only is it not streamlined, but it also puts us open to some of the hacks. Anyway, we'll get into that in a minute. So Alan, tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Some career highlights before you joined the juggernaut Infios, not Infios.
Infios, you got it. So I am, like I said, originally from the northwest suburbs in Illinois. I have had the opportunity to operate in China, India, Germany, and Brazil for extended periods of time through work. So that's been really fortunate for me and opened my eyes on how things can be different, what we could do. As far as academically, I do have PhDs in both international business and economics.
Whoa.
And that gives a little bit of perspective onto how I think. I tend to be very structured and analytical and intentional about strategy and innovation and kind of forward thinking in organizations. I've always been, from a professional perspective, really disciplined, really execution and operational focused. I believe in high degrees of accountability. I am a big proponent of leadership. It's not something that I do as a part of my job. It's actually something that I invest in and I really put a lot of focus on because I've learned throughout my career it has always been the teams that have rallied as one who have won. And it doesn't matter the talent or the capabilities. It's they get together, they believe, and they go. And that's been my claim to fame for the organizations that I've been with. But as far as where I've worked, to your point, large organizations, highly complex, multinational organizations, global span, hundreds of countries, leading teams of 5,000 plus multi-billion-dollar P&Ls under my responsibility. And I've worked in multiple industries. Primarily, I started on what I call the customer side now, manufacturing, retail, consumer goods, things like that, automotive, healthcare, renewable energy, power generation. I've dabbled in all those industries, which has been really fun. And what I've learned through that in my background is that I tend to step into complexity, right? Highly fragmented, like we were just talking about, highly fragmented environments that are stalling, growth is becoming stale. You have connection issues and processes that are breaking throughout those handoffs. Somehow in my career, that became my niche and my superpower, if you will. And people keep putting me in those incredibly high demand positions. And that's where I've thrived. But as I mentioned, overall, the teams I built, the discipline, the initiatives, and I just lean into ideation. That's my biggest thing is I don't believe that solving problems is a mechanical budgetary constraint. I believe that creativity, I believe that thinking outside the box and then finding a solution that can accommodate that will give you more from an organization than anything else that we do. So that's a quick background of what I got.
So with that background, you have obviously had some options. What made you join Infios? And what made you stay?
No, I love that question. I'm very glad that you asked. So I am recent to the organization. I actually was hired at the end of last year and got to start 2026 for the organization. I was really excited. I had spent 2 decades as a supply chain professional. And as I got deeper into my career and came up with some really advanced, complex supply chain designs, I was always frustrated at limitations. We can't do this because of system availability. We can't do this because it's not known. No one's done it before, so we have to pioneer it. And I always thought to myself, if the opportunity came for me to be a part of an organization where I could help build that narrative to make them the best in the supply chain space, I would absolutely fight for it with all my passion. An opportunity came up at Infios. I reached out to the CEO and I'm like, we have a lot of common connections. We have a lot of common overlap. I have been the customer of your product. I'd love to talk. And the rest was history. So I'm here because I get to take all of those pain points that I had as a customer and hopefully expedite or leapfrog us forward past what a lot of our competitors can do.
Yep. I love it. You mentioned complexity. I'm an automotive guy myself. And I remember we used to always say complexity is the enemy of quality. And by the way, in any given factory, this is more theoretical. You could have no two cars being the same coming out of a factory because there's different trim levels, there's different colors, there's different options. And every car built, the expectation is you're going to have the right quality. It's a never ending fight because the competition is doing the same thing and they're getting better every day. And when we talk about our supply chains, we had just over the last 10, 15 years, just dozens of new technologies that popped in and gave us so much more. The TMS, obviously, the ELD, we fought it.
That's been a big changer for the US.
We didn't want, I remember I did some webinars on electronic logging devices. I remember at the end, people would raise their hand and go, we're not doing it. I go, I am not the federal government. I'm doing a webinar on it. But we didn't want it. But what we realized as soon as we got there is it opened up a whole new world of visibility. All sorts of companies have popped up with visibility, pricing algorithms, all sorts of cool new technology. And we don't want to give any of it back. But the problem is it's all disconnected and it can add some data. But is that data useful? Is it helping me make decisions faster? Is it making my business better? Or is it just more complexity? And
no, I completely agree. And what I've settled in throughout my career, and I'm hoping a lot of the supply chain professionals that listen to your show would agree with, it always comes down to that CFO, right? The financial performance, they're ultimately the ones that say you're winning or losing. So if you present any level of data or documentation, to your point, that has any inconsistency, it is usually just discredited and put off to the side. And that happens to exactly what you're saying. You're taking disparate systems, you're marrying data together, and you're hoping that you do it right and it's complete and it tells the same narrative as what your CFO and his financial team are looking at on their statements at the end of the month. And if it doesn't, you've got a whole different problem to go solve.
Oh, yeah. And our global supply chains are global. And that means they're going to have different languages, different currencies, different date standards, obviously time zone differences, business differences. The way they do business in China is going to be different than the way they do it here or Mexico or Europe. So we need our systems to help us. So I don't have to look and go, oh, this is quoted in euro. I don't, what do I do with this? I can't have that in my system. So we need some system. I keep hitting on it, the order to cash, that allows me to have consistency and allows me to streamline as opposed to fight with handoffs and connections. And I know we keep coming back to that, but I think it's super important because we're going to talk about freight audit and payment. And that's a big part of the complexity of our business.
Yeah, it's all handoffs. It really is. And it's such high volume, and with the impact on global trade over the last couple of years, the pandemic's impact on supply chain, those expenses have just skyrocketed. And the tolerance for errors on it has gotten much, much lower. So expectations are very high on that level of accuracy and control.
Yep. So the number one question in our business is, where's my stuff? The number two question, and it could probably be 1A, is where's my money? So I say that because I want to talk about freight audit and payment. Please introduce what you guys do in freight audit and payment.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, the freight audit solution, and for anyone listening to this in the industry, please, it's not an oversimplification. It's just for people that might not be aware. It is a really basic, simplistic process. You're taking the contract that you signed with the carrier on what the rates should be and the services rendered, SLAs and all that. You're taking the invoice from said carrier and you're marrying those together and making sure that the rate is right, accessorials are correct, and that the service was delivered. And if all those things are good, it gives it a stamp, an approval, says it was audited, it gets paid. If it's not, it creates a resolution. We have to go back and talk to carrier, hey, You charged us for this, but it's not on the bill of lading. Was it actually used? If not, you need to correct, and things like that. So the ROI in it is ensuring that what you're paying is what you agreed to, and that the services that were signed up for were actually performed as requested. It gets complex just because of volume, sheer volume.
Yeah. And when I know a lot of people are listening will say, yeah, we need freight audit payment for over the road. Oh, and also for parcel, but also ocean shipping has so many little issues with it. So there's always, I don't know, I'm not close to it, but there's a date change where the price goes up or down based on the season. They have seasonal pricing for that. And before we hit the record button today, we talked about what happened during COVID, where the ports and the ocean shipping companies just became completely overwhelmed. We couldn't move stuff out of the ports fast enough, and people really got hammered with detention fees and demurrage fees. And in the past, we just said, it is what it is. I got to pay this. But some of them were like, I couldn't pick it up.
Yes, it was buried at the bottom of a pile.
Yes, I can't pick it up, and you're charging me for not picking it up. You don't have it ready. So that, I think that led to the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. I've did an episode of that. I should put a link to that in the show notes. But that was to make sure that the ocean shipping lines don't take advantage. And honestly, I don't think anybody in that business necessarily was trying to. Maybe there's some bad actors. They weren't trying to take advantage, but companies could find themselves paying millions of dollars extra in shipping that year. Nothing related to the cost of shipping, all about handoffs, all about getting.
And we saw during that time with the companies that I worked for, we saw organizations outlaying hundreds of thousands of dollars on a monthly basis because of it. And while freight audit, just to be clear, doesn't solve that, it does give the data back to the shipper that says your contract said 3 free days out of this moment, and these were all requested before or after that expiration. So you have an opportunity to go and dispute these. So we give them the tools to do that. But when you got into those types of situations, those are things where we're not withholding money. And just want to clarify that.
Yep. And when you end up with the largest shippers spending hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and then the mistakes, which don't tend to go in your direction, the mistakes can be millions and millions of dollars. So you work very hard to take $1 million out of your logistics and supply chain costs, and then it just gets added back with a few mistakes. And some of the mistakes, there's oversights. And I'll give a perfect example. You say, hey, we need these shipments here by UPS or FedEx by 8 a.m. every morning. And then you find out later on, we really don't need them. They could have been by end of business. But what you might also find out in the audit is that they never get, and I'm not critical of UPS or FedEx, they're great companies. But you could find if you had millions of shipments with them that, hey, 1% were late and didn't meet that 8 a.m. You're entitled to your money back in a lot of cases on that.
Absolutely.
And you don't have the ability to audit it.
No, and you're absolutely right. A lot of it from the audit perspective isn't so much a lack of trust, to your point, in the carriers. These carriers do awesome work. They are absolutely the backbone of society for what we do. But when you get into large volume, especially when you look at the parcel leaders, you're not talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of shipments. You're talking about millions and millions of packages just going through their ecosystem. And just by the laws of nature, some are going to fail. And when they do, they're very good about refunding for services failed. They just need to be informed about it. And when you're dealing with that volume, it's overwhelming. And that's what we do. We take that stuff and we clean it up. And one of the other ones that's actually most interesting that we see on our parcel audit, which some organizations probably intimately aware of, some may not even know that it happens. For people that have their own printing stations for UPS or FedEx or DHL labels in-house, 9 times out of 10, you print that label, your shipment is put into their system, and that cost is charged against your account. If that label goes in the trash, you're paying for it. So there is a big audit that happens for kind of freight paid, not used. So a tracking number was issued, but there was actually no shipment associated with it. That's entitled for an entire refund. And we actually see a lot of that. That's probably one of the primary things that we'll see in high volume parcel outfits, where those types of things can be recovered. And that's what freight audit can help.
Yeah. And you guys do all freight audit, whether it's air freight, ocean shipping, over the road transportation, small parcel, LTL, anything that's moving, you guys will audit it.
And we do it globally. We have a large presence in the US. We have a very significant outfit in EMEA. We have Asia Pacific resources. So yeah, we can help anyone almost anywhere where they reside.
Oh, I love it. I love it that we have global supply chains. And one of the issues also is freight fraud. I know somehow, some way, I'm not into the details of this, but freight fraud is part of it is getting paid for shipments they didn't do. So if you say, how can that possibly happen? I'm not sure, but hopefully Alan knows how that happens.
So there's two things that we see in the freight fraud world. We'll start with the one that you're alluding to, which because of the volume of transportation activity that most organizations mid to large size would see, it is not uncommon for an invoice to be presented and just paid, right? Because the detriment that could come from that, from carrier disruption, goods being withheld, not accepting further loads, most organizations are very sensitive to that, especially with how tight we have this just-in-time philosophy that's evolved over the decades. So that's one thing that we've happened. And in the news, I won't name the companies, we've heard instances about people sending invoices to their organization and having them paid and being able to extract tens of millions of dollars. That is often how that would manifest, sending invoices and they just get paid because small dollars, high volume, it's easy to wash out. That's one. The most common that we're seeing, though, from a pure fraudulent perspective, is actually coming through with the use of AI. It's gotten a little bit more challenging. People are basically replicating legitimate documentation and altering either addresses or carriers. So you could send a shipment to a customer with carrier X. That document will get intercepted and recreated, and then a different driver with all of the same information, but a different delivery location and a different carrier will be assigned, and the people picking it up are none the wiser. So while we can't stop at your dock that happening, when those invoices come through, we do see that the carrier was tendered as X, but the paperwork is showing Y. This doesn't match. We need to look into it, because otherwise it could just get lost until somebody opens a claim or raises their hand. It's gotten really interesting the last couple of years.
Yeah, and those are those phishing that I constantly get them. It's anytime you invoice somebody in my company, we'll do an invoice and then we'll get a whole bunch of things that payment remittance. And by the way, you get payment remittance. Of course, you want to open it because you think, oh, that was fast payment. I was thinking somehow they know what's going on. And we've seen this. We've seen some real blatant stuff happen. And from what I've done, there was a webinar that I attended, and I also interviewed the person after. The cartels are now involved in this. And the freight fraud and the cargo theft that we're seeing now isn't opportunistic. This is sometimes state actors, sometimes it's cartels getting very sophisticated, but also there's hacktivists who are getting involved with this to steal. And from what I understand, they can sit in your system and wait until there's a big payday, and then that's where they change the documentation. So the check goes to this address instead of the regular address.
It's funny you mentioned that with some of the challenges we've seen in South America when cartels getting involved. There was an organization that we were supporting, and because of the high value cargo, high visibility they had, their trucks were constantly getting captured. So the solution to that was actually to start doing a 3-cart Monte. They would actually ship multiple trucks to the same destination, one of them with goods, 2 of them empty, because it decreased the odds of it being captured. And that was still cheaper than the losses that they were paying for the inventory that was being taken. It is really a fascinating world. And it's always, I don't know, I think it's entertaining at parties when I'm talking to people about the global logistics stuff. Most of them are probably just wanting me to shut up. But it is the largest industry in the world. If you think about all the transportation that occurs, whether it is delivering parcel goods or it's inbound raw goods coming out of the earth, going to refinement and then going into manufacturing or processing and then self-production. It's just, it never ends. And it's just getting more and more complex. And it's just so ripe for opportunity for those types of fraudulent activities to occur. It really is a fascinating kind of organic industry.
Yeah. So when we talk about freight audit and payment, one of the big things that I remember, I was at a logistics company and we had to audit some small parcel shipments. When I say some, it was just a couple thousand, but we didn't have machinery. We didn't have technology to do it. And so we had people manually doing it. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And so they would flag out of those 1,050, 50 or 60. And you go, yeah, and hours of tedious work that I was embarrassed to ask my team to do that. And it was our responsibility because we said we would audit this stuff for them, but we weren't capable of doing it because we didn't have technology. So talk about your technology. And I think just as important while we're talking about, it's the connected systems that make this work. It's because you could have a system all by itself that is freight audit and payment, but what makes it better is saying, I know that from the very beginning order to the end, as opposed to we imported it into our system.
Absolutely. Let's start with that portion of it. So the interconnectivity aspect of it, one of the things that was exciting for Infios and the position they take in supply chain. We talked about transportation management, right? That's really, when we talk about supply chain, I've always looked at three threads. And since the 80s, since supply chain has been coined, I haven't seen these changed, right? There is always the execution aspect. There's a visibility aspect. Where's my stuff? And then there's the financials. I have not seen those three themes ever get disrupted.
Say that one more time.
There's execution. So where you actually go to do the work. And then there is the visibility. What is the status and positioning of said work? And then what was the financial implications? That's my third thread of supply chain. And again, I've seen those to the point on disparate systems. The challenge has always been bringing those three together, right? And that's where we want to focus on. So when we talk about our transportation management and FAP, transportation is the execution aspect of that thread that I just talked about. And a lot of the TMs, including ours, can actually give you that visibility of where's my stuff that's going through that system. That's great. But we took it a step further when we talk about interconnectivity. If you think about everything you need to audit a freight invoice, you need to know the order, the carrier, the tender, the shipper, the parties, and you need to know the contract. All of that stuff is already in the TM, right? So we talk about overlap and interconnectivity, 96, 97% correlation of data points, depending on how you slice that up. You've done that homework. The only thing that it's missing was the ability to ingest an invoice so that I could say, here's the invoice against all these things. Is this a three-way match? We took that, and that's how we created that FAP product. We integrated into our TM so that we can have that single ecosystem so you have less implementation or integration costs. But the second a shipment is created, the FAP is already primed to just look for this invoice when it hits, and it can process faster, which is really cool. But we do, to your point, we can split that out. We can do just FAP services or the TM or both. So it's not all in or none, but we did look at it as that holistic, to your point.
Yeah, I think the biggest shippers in the world, and I'm assuming, and do you work with shippers and 3PLs?
We work with almost everybody. I was very surprised when I joined to see how amazing the logo list was and how diverse it is.
Oh, I can tell you MercuryGate for a long time has been one of the go-tos for the largest 3PLs, but also for the largest shippers.
Yeah, it was interesting when we were going through the interview process. MercuryGate was my first TM implementation as a customer when I worked in renewables. I'm not going to say when because I'm trying to deny my age, but it was one of the first things that I got a chance to do. And what I liked about it then was its flexibility. When you look at the large leaders in this space, these big names, when you get to that size, there's a little bit of complexity when you want to get into customization or some more advanced abnormal work. MercuryGate was really in that sweet spot where they could accommodate and mold a little bit more to work through that. So that got me excited. And then over the years, it seems like that's really where they've played is we provide that service at a little bit of a different capacity and expectation because we're trying, our mission is to meet the customers where they are, not put a product into the market that we want them to conform to.
I was at a little 3PL and we had another transportation management system. And I remember every time we'd be working on a big account, the owner would say, if we get this one, we're moving to MercuryGate. We get this one, we're moving to MercuryGate. And
did you?
They actually did after I left.
Okay.
But I'll be honest, originally I was like, I get it. It's got a level of sophistication that allows us to make a little more money on our business, because maybe through consolidation of loads. But what I was saying is that's a very sophisticated tool. Do we need it yet? We were small, and I was afraid it was going to be, we were a little top heavy with our technology, but they did move eventually. And also, after I quit there, I went to a trucking company, and they said, "Do you know how to use MercuryGate?" And I was like, I wasn't booking shipments, but I go, I've gotten the demo a few times, so I think I understand how to check it out. So they gave me an idea. I was like, oh, this is cool. So I called the owner. I go, dude, I'm sitting down and going through MercuryGate right now. He goes, so I said, you should come over and watch. But
That's great to hear.
Yeah. So you getting back to it, obviously having all of the Infios tools makes sense. You can use that whole suite. But if you're not, and you say, I just need freight audit and payment, you guys can still do that by importing it from other systems.
Yeah, the traditional ways that people are familiar with, whether it's flat files or EDI connectivity, things like that, we service all of those. Obviously, when you talk about steamship lines and things like that, there's still a lot of legacy paperwork involved, and we have the ability to use OCR technology to integrate those. And then obviously there's still, every FAP has a person in the loop at some point, because not everything goes perfect. And we have teams staffed up around the world to help course correct on those exceptions.
So you mentioned OCR. Please explain what OCR is for those who don't do it every day.
Yeah, so OCR was tech that was pushed out quite a while ago. And basically what it is, optical character recognition. So when you're receiving a file or a piece of paper and you want to digitize it, OCR was created to ease that transition as opposed to having someone type it in. And historically, depending on the data you were looking at, you could get pretty good 60, 70, 80% accuracy for it. But what's happened over the last couple of years with the deep learning, machine learning, and agentic AI getting stacked on top of OCR, that technology has absolutely gone into a different echelon, and it is changing how we look at our business.
Yeah. And so you're taking this unstructured data sometimes, I'm assuming from attachments or from bodies of emails, and be able to put it into a field. And so I think that not only have you just ingested it, you've made it better. And when you give it back, your customers say, oh, they didn't just save us money on our payment this week. They also put everything in a format that I can now start to manipulate.
Right. It's reportable. It's dissectable. They can absolutely go in there and use that for trends. And, I don't want to oversimplify it. There are some providers in the world who still do mail paper copies. So we have to honor that as well. And it's always fun to see a mailroom in a modern industry, but everyone has to deal with that, because I'd say one of the challenges for freight audit outside of the pure volume is carriers are coming on board all the time. In the truckload market in the US, 80% of all truckload people are owner operator, right? You need to be able to consume those invoices and pay them if they're not digital. So the ability to adapt and flex into those markets is where really the science kind of becomes paramount in this freight audit world.
Yeah. And one of the realities is the biggest companies in the world, they were early adopters of everything. So they have a mainframe that has a billion records. So when you say, oh my God, why are they using a mainframe? Because they got it in 1968. That's why. And it's not easy to just pull it out and say, yeah, we're moving you to the cloud. That should be an easy move. And they're reluctant. And that's the same with a lot of technology. You're connecting to the companies that bought the first TMS. They bought the first WMS. And so when they say this is the way we do it, they're not being laggards. It's hard to rip out the foundations of their operations. And they'll do it. It's just not easy.
No, you're right. And one of the trends that we've seen when we talk about modern supply chain and what that means is what you're talking about. More and more pressure to go cloud-based, get off-prem, the transition to do that, the compute power to do that. How is AI going to complement that to make it easier? Because storage is getting to be absolutely atrocious from an expense perspective. Those are the things that people are leaning into, because supply chains, from what I've observed, are becoming less from stability and standardization to more adaptability and agility. Being able to predict and see a change coming so that you can do something beforehand as opposed to retroactive. So the trend seems that people are willing to get rid of that I'm going to carry heavy inventory positions. I'm going to have a stable supply chain, and I'll gradually drive my total cost of ownership or my profitability over time just through understanding my flow and my usage. To be, look, disruptions cost us more than anything else at this point. We need to be able to see and respond beforehand. Cloud-based gives that because the architecture that it uses allows them to plug into new systems easier, freight audit solutions, claim solutions, third-party visibility solutions, those data aggregators. That's where it's becoming popular, is because it makes it so much easier to plug and play as opposed to an on-prem solution.
Yeah. It's not easy to pull those out. I joke about this, but it's anyone who's experienced it probably will agree with me. I worked on these mainframes back in the olden days, the CAD systems. And I remember we had the guy who was in charge of the mainframe, and he was supposedly support, but he was basically king of the business unofficially. He wasn't on the org chart that way, but I always remember I printed some stuff out for a meeting. He goes, "You need to stop printing everything. Don't print out." I go, "I needed it for a meeting." I deleted those. And do you say, "What the hell are you doing?" No, I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I won't do that again." And I'm thinking, that your support, you're supposed to help me. But when you get off of on-premise, your system is no longer there. You no longer have that king of your business who is angry at the engineers.
You're bringing up some sad memories from the day.
But also, as security becomes more and more important to everybody, having all of your information on premises makes no sense. But I think we all recognize we'd move to the cloud if it was easy, but it's not easy for companies that are 50 years old with their systems and their technology.
And it's one thing that I encourage any organization or supply chain professional that's thinking about making a large technological change. And you just mentioned it. Some companies will think that they're too early in their journey to invest in a serious piece of tech, whether it's an ERP, a TMOM, whatever it might be. But then you get to the point where you're institutionalized and you're heavy. And now it becomes fear. It's, can we do this? How disruptive is it going to be? So it's better to be early than to wait, because it's just going to get harder. It's going to be more complicated, and the disruptions are going to be that much more challenging.
So we saw in the last 5 years or so, we saw of a consolidation of some of the larger transportation management systems. So as those acquisitions happened, they said, "Don't worry, Alan, you can keep your system. We just bought it. You can still keep it on premise. No worry." 6 months later, you get an email saying, "Hey, we're going to move you to the cloud this weekend." And you're like,
yeah.
And that is when a lot of those companies are now going back and saying, "Hey, if we're going to be forced to move to the cloud, maybe this is a good time to look and see, what does our technology need? If we're going to go through the pain of a transition, let's see if the company that acquired the company we're using is actually who we want to work with." And it's opening up a lot of, and those are not easy conversations, again, because you bought that system 30 years ago. Everyone who bought it is gone. And now you have to get a brand new team together and says, when's the last time any of us bought a TMS, an OWMS, or an order management system? Say, never. But let's figure out what we need to do. And it's not an easy decision. I take that back. It's very easy. You just go with Infios.
It's an easy decision. It's the fear of change. But you're right, because a lot of the stuff, when we look at the on-prem solution and the overhead that goes with that, it's gotten to the point, and we have over 10 years, 15 years of history to demonstrate this. It is not more cost effective to run your own in many cases anymore. In our modern society, because of what AI is doing to compute power and component costs, it's a little bit of an influx at the moment. But overall, it's just gotten to be so cost effective. You have lower overhead. You don't have to invest in equipment. You don't have an army of network engineers trying to keep your servers up when they go down. So it's just gotten to the point where you're right. It's an easy decision financially, but it's that fear of change and that disruption that can absolutely bring someone screeching back.
When you think about the biggest companies, they're in the business of consumer goods or automotive or whatever they make or whatever they distribute. What they never want to be is closed down for a week because of logistics and technology glitches. Anyway, getting back to freight audit and payment, what are the reasons people come to you? I'm sure you guys are reaching out to companies all the time and saying, "Hey, we can help you. We can help you." What's the last straw? Why are they calling you back and saying, Alan, yes, help us. What is the last straw that they're...
So we see a couple of different examples. And one of the more common ones is going to be if you have a shipper who's got a decent spend and decent volume and they don't have an audit process in place. That is a very common kind of catalyst to pick up the phone and call us, because what they're seeing is we're doing thousands of shipments. We can't audit every invoice every time accurately. So we need to invest in something that can help us make sure that we're holding our costs true and we're holding our carriers accountable, because it's becoming a significant part of our P&L. So that's probably one of the biggest things that we see when people reach out to us. They haven't had it in the past, and they're starting to realize that volume and expense is an exposure.
Yeah. And I think with a lot of times you'll see, yeah, we audit it. I got Jim over here does it. And then Jim is saying, this was not supposed to be my job, but this became my full-time job. And there's always, even now, stacks of paper that he is supposed to be going through. He doesn't have best practices. He doesn't have technology to do it. And you basically said, hey, we're going to hamstring you. You figure it out, a manual process, and God forbid you quit.
Yes.
And
that tribal knowledge is just gone.
Yeah. And also, to some extent, it's okay. I'm going through these. I mentioned the example before. I got charged. I was quoted $1,800. Now the bill came in at $1,800, and then a few months later, I get another bill for $300. Then another month later, I get a bill for $2,100. Which one do I pay? Maybe pays all three. I mean, I don't want to be late. I don't want to get on the bad list for the carriers. That might be the biggest risk in all this, is I don't want to get on the bad side of my carriers because they're not going to give me the rates I want. No ability. It's a very difficult job that you're making somebody do, probably without the technology they need.
Or it even comes into, a lot of times organizations will try and do that work, usually with an accounts receivable and payable group. And they might not understand the accessorials. They might not understand all the NMFC information that could be on there and things like that. So then they're constantly reaching out to the logistics team and saying, hey, what does this mean? And is it right? So then it gets offloaded to transportation. And now you're paying logisticians or supply chain professionals decent money to do what's perceived as low value work.
Yeah, this is something that should be outsourced to an experts who have the technology to do it. And again,
I biasly agree with you.
And again, that even if you don't get the entire suite of tools that all give you one interconnected supply chain tech stack, still you got to get that other piece done, because it is costly. And again, with freight fraud, you could be paying people who are not supposed to get paid, and that's not good for your career.
And that's one of the benefits. To your question about who comes to us, we talked about people who need it for the first time. We get a lot of calls from existing customers who just want easy. I'm already an Infios member. You guys have so much of our data. I'm tired of playing in the network. Let's just do this because it's easier and it's usually a little bit more cost effective. But then we get the ones that are looking to make a change because of, are they unhappy with their current provider, or is their supply chain have a little bit more of one scenario than another that we might excel in compared to some of our competitors? What people like about us and what we really try to differentiate ourselves on is when you get into that freight audit, as we talked about before, we also have that tangential services around it. So let's just say you have a lot of claims management that comes through your transportation. We have that service. And it's not a big TM integration. It's not anything like that, but it is a third-party service that a lot of people use, especially when you deal with high damage, high volume claim items. If people want to grow, it's nice to know that we have your data, you're in our infrastructure, and we can rapidly put you into some of these other solutions if you ever need a quick fix. That's really what makes us different.
Yep. What's also nice is if you have one of your accountants, if you can take them out of the drudgery of doing audit, and you can, and then he gets this information back in a format that is better than he gave it. And now all of a sudden he can say, I've elevated myself where I'm looking at freight spend trends as opposed to looking at a transaction. I basically elevated him and potentially given them the ability to add a lot more value than they were previously.
It's a good point. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize, and usually the conversations we have with the senior financial teams like the CFOs or the FP&A leaders, When you have an FP&A product, especially like ours, you get visibility into accruals. So depending on how they manage their cost accounting, if they actually put cost in the period that it occurred, or they do cost in the period in which it was recognized, that's a very different process. If you want to actually put the cost of the freight based on the activity when it occurred, you have to set an accrual, and that's very complicated, and it usually leads to a lot of adjustments in their GL. But when you're working with freight audit, the second that shipment is created, we know that there's a dollar amount associated with it. And we can tell you, hey, there's X amount of open activity that you should be basing out for your accruals and things like that. So that level of visibility, a lot of financial teams like it because it gives them an idea of how big of a check they're going to outlay before it just shows up and they're like, what the heck is this?
Yeah. It's way better. Again, I can't imagine asking somebody to do that because right now, good people have options. And I always say the younger generation, one of the things they bring is they know there's a technology for that. So if you say, hey, the way you get a cab is you just pick up the phone and you go into the phone book and you call a cab company, they're like, well, I got a Lyft. What are you talking about? I've experienced it myself is if you give them a problem that seems manual, they're going to go find a technology for it. And I think that's a value they're bringing to it. And I have two daughters who are in the workforce. They'll quickly say, there's technology for that. Why are you doing it manually? That's their mindset because that's their entire experience. So if you want to keep those youngsters happy, we're going to have to start moving that work to the place it belongs with the experts. Anyway, I'm going to summarize what we talked about, then I want to get your final thoughts on the topic. So I'm talking to my friend Alan Rowlett, and today's topic is execution, visibility, and financial control, how Infios, that's not Infios, it's Infios, solves global supply chain challenges. And by the way, the three pieces of supply chain, you mentioned your model that has not failed over the last 25 years is execution, visibility, and the financial controls. And that's what we're talking about today. And we talked a little bit about Infios is a company that bought up, I think, Körber Supply Chain, which does warehouse management, order management systems. Also, MercuryGate, kind of one of the best known transportation management systems. I'm assuming there's some other companies that went into there, but what they basically have now is an order to cash suite of tools that some of the biggest companies in the world are using, but also some of the top 3PLs are using this also. And I think I can say this, looking at the trends across the industry, this is the new trend. The idea of having a standalone WMS, a standalone TMS, and doing order management through, ERP, that is yesterday's news. I think there's a lot of reasons why we're looking for these suites of tools. First off, they're all interconnected. They're going to be much more streamlined. All those handoffs or clunky integrations aren't necessary. When I started this podcast almost 8 years ago, people talked about integrations. It's like building a literal bridge from one system to another. It doesn't require that anymore. We should be using the companies that have built the suite of tools from order to cash so we don't have to do the clunky integrations. By the way, those integrations, they're one-offs and they are more subject to the security breaches that we're all trying to avoid. Also, the bigger companies like Infios, they can spend the money to prevent the cybersecurity issues, the freight fraud. They can spend on it. I'm afraid the smaller companies in the space are going to have to find a way to make the investments, and I don't know that they can. So it's good reason you should be fleeing to the biggest companies in the space. We talked about all the issues around auditing. So whether it's ocean freight or a small parcel or over the road, less than truckload, anything that's moving, you're going to get a quoted price, and then you're going to get an invoice price, and some number, 1, 2, 3%, whatever, is going to be incorrect. And auditing it yourself, you probably don't have the technology to do it. You probably don't have the best practices. You don't have the team. You might have one guy who is disgruntled in doing it and wishing you would outsource it. So
you know too well.
Yeah. It's also not utilizing them in the way they want to be utilized. They want to be more the guy who can say, hey, boss, I found a way we can save 5%, as opposed to saying I've saved $100 on a
Exactly.
retention. And I think we talked a little bit about the interconnected systems. Ideally, you work with Infios and all of your stuff is going through their system, but they'll also work with companies where you can export directly to their freight pay and audit. And all this is coming down to is all those extra costs, the detention, the demurrage, the mistakes, the supposed to be there by 8, didn't get there till 10. We need to catch all those. Those are money that you are due. And this really comes back to adherence to the contract, keeping the promises to your customers. Anyway, enough of my blather. Alan, put a big old bow on this one. Final thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, so we've touched on a lot of it, and it's been really exciting. But at its core, the future of supply chain is about intelligent connectivity, right? Networks are growing more complex across more nodes and geographies and systems, like we've touched on. The competitive advantage will belong to the organizations that unify that physical movement, those financial flows, and that visibility. And again, it's intelligence, cohesive, single operating model. The evolving technologies going into real-time visibility and autonomous workflows are absolutely transforming supply chains. We're getting less and less of that reactive model. We're getting into more of those kind of fragmented functions and adaptive, precision-driven ecosystems. Those are all the things that are getting disrupted by it. In companies that embrace that shift, they're just not going to keep pace with disruption. The people who do that first, they're going to be the quickest, they're going to be the most resilient, and those are the customers that are going to set the value prop that everyone else starts to chase in the future. So when we come back and look at it, I would say the future of supply chain and what we talked about is about intelligent connectivity. And that's the stuff that we need to start looking at today if we're going to lead tomorrow or not get left behind.
I love it. I love it. One more time, who are your ideal customers?
For us, it's really anybody. We work in the manufacturing space. We work in the retail space. We work with the 3PLs. If you move product and you have orders or a facility to move those orders and pick, pack, ship, we can help you out.
I love it. I love it. So I'll make sure I put a link to your LinkedIn profile, link to your website, any other link you and your go-to-market team give me. I'll make sure I put those in the show notes so people can reach out and talk to you. Alan, what conferences will we see you and the fine folks from Infios at?
So we do have a bunch of them coming up, and I'll share them so you can share them with your community, which will be really exciting. You know, the ones that are coming up right now, TLC Annual Conference in Nashville, that's coming up next month, and the Logistics World Summit in Mexico City. Both of those are our most recent, but we've got a slew of them that you can catch us with.
Wait, what was the one TLC, did you say?
Yeah, the TLC Annual Conference in Nashville.
What is that? I never heard of that one. It's always a new one.
There is always a new one. There is always a new one, but it's always going to be about the transportation and logistics.
I always say, before we hit record, I asked you what conferences, and I laughed. I said, you go to all conferences. You can't go to a conference without seeing the people from Infios at that conference.
It's because our corporate color is relentless yellow, and they're very proud of it.
Oh,
you can't miss us.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
We're the traffic cones walking around the conference floor.
Yeah. I love what you guys are doing. And again, I do think that the future is connected. Not to be too much of a wonk here,
Put
but
a pin on it. Yeah.
The idea of all these systems being all disconnected, creating a whole bunch of silos. Again, getting back to it, the biggest shippers in the world are looking for flow, and we answered with silos. And we have to get out of that. They're going to figure it out. We're not doing the right thing, and you guys have figured it out.
Absolutely.
Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the invite.
Yep.
Hope to do it again soon.
Yes, I'd like that. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward. You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.